On stage when I really felt free. And that's something else. That's feeling something else. Like I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that half of my life, no fear. Lots of children have no fear. That's the closest way, that's the only way I can describe it. That's not all of it, but it is something to really, really feel. It's like a new way of seeing. A new way of seeing something. Have you like, I've noticed. It's like a new way of seeing. A new way of seeing something.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So welcome everybody, and many thanks to be here in a privileged moment to hear Mary Cohen speaking to you about her work. I'm going to very shortly introduce her. Mary is an associate professor of music education at the University of Iowa. She researches music making and well-being, songwriting, and collaborative communities. In 2009, she founded the Oakdale Prison Community Choir. In 2010, she began the Songwriting Workshop at Oakdale Prison. In the Prison Songwriting Workshop, the participants have written over 150 songs, and the Oakdale Choir has performed over 75 of these songs. She's completing a book with co-author Stuart Paul Duncan titled Freeing Silenced Voices, Music Making in Prisons. She is collaborating on an international initiative to research music in prison and peace building. Her research is published in International Journal of Research in Choral Singing, Journal of Research in Music Education, the Australian Journal of Music Education, Journal of Historical Research in Music Education, Journal of Correctional Education, the International Journal of Music, Community Music, the Prison Service Journal, International Journal of Music Education, and in numerous book chapters. So please welcome Mary.
Thank you, and I'm happy to report today I received a negative COVID test for my travel tomorrow. And so, because my native language is not Portuguese, I think if I take my mask off, you can hear me a little better. If I speak too quickly, wave me down. If I say something that doesn't make sense, let me clarify for you. big gratitude to Graça, to Lucas, to Sim, to George, to Adelina, to all of the amazing participants of this Music in Detention's International Research Seminar. We've been together all week, and today it's an honor to be here to talk about this topic. It is a difficult topic, so I have interlaced our time together with a little lighthearted stress relief. I hope that you will enjoy that. We walked into the stage today greeted by this amazing musician. His name is Nicholas Payton. Is anybody familiar with Nicholas Payton? He's a Black American musician, and the collection you just listened to is from this organization, a curated collection of videos titled Music for Abolition. We'll learn a lot about abolition tonight while we're here talking, and this particular one is titled Freedom is No Fear. I encourage everyone to visit the University of California, Santa Cruz Visualizing Abolition webinar. They have all of these available, these remarkable webinars that occurred between the 2020-2021 academic year. And they all have these, there are like 15 of these videos labeled that Terry Lynn Carrington curated. So Nicholas Payton, by the way, my husband and I just got tickets to see him in Chicago at the Jazz Showcase at the end of the month. So very excited. Nicholas Payton. Yeah, Nicholas Payton. So thank you to Nicholas. Now we're going to go from Nicholas Payton to Iowa. Let me explain. We're going to give you a little understanding of this particular project. We're going to watch just 3 minutes of a video. This is a video that won a regional Emmy by Tyler Brinegar, is the Iowa Public Television videographer that created this documentary. The whole thing's 9 minutes. We'll just watch the first 3. And if you want to watch more, you can click, it's called Greetings from Iowa Oakdale Choir. I'll let the video play for itself to provide a little context to the project that I've been involved in for 10 years, pre-pandemic. See if it works. Think it will? Everybody think it will? Yes.
Prison is a lot about taking your humanity. Restorative justice is first about making the person feel human again.
We have it warmed up now.
In choir, you're not viewed as an offender, you're viewed as a person.
In the field of community music, we practice the theory of the welcome and hospitality.
93% of the 8,000 some inmates that are in prison will someday walk out. The real measure of our success isn't what happens on the inside, it's what happens when they go to the outside. Prison life is boring. You might have a menial job that you have to take care of for a few hours, but for the rest of the time, it's just trying to figure out what you're going to do with your day. We all kind of like those days once, but imagine doing that 365 days.
I started out doing prison time in Fort Madison and Anamosa, and they didn't have outside guests or anything. So when I got to Oakdale, a buddy of mine's like, hey man, you should join the choir.
2 years after I got here, the choir started, and it was, I'm not a joiner. I don't join things. And then my buddy Bailey came in and said, all right, you like singing, you're coming down to this.
Choose a pitch, any pitch, and let it sustain.
Half of the choir is made up of outside volunteers, and half of the choir is inside.
If you walked by you wouldn't know which ones of us are incarcerated and which ones of us are leaving in a few hours.
At first, it wasn't for me. I wasn't gonna go, I wasn't going to get into it. But then I met Dr. Cohen, and she encouraged me to at least try songwriters. And wrote a song, and she liked it, and people liked it.
Let's crack the sky. Let's crack the sky.
To write a song, I didn't think I could do that. Singing, I absolutely know I could not do that. And Miss Mary was like, everybody can sing.
Yes, everybody can sing. Did you know that? If you know that, raise your hand. Yeah. And guess what? It's a learned skill. So if you don't know how to sing now, it'll happen another time. Yes? Yes. All right, take a big breath in. Big exhale. All right, I do that quite a bit to help myself ground, and if it helps you, beauty before all of us. So the choir that you just saw began in 2009 with 22 inside singers and 22 outside singers. The outside singers were students in a class that I taught. It was titled Teaching in Alternative Contexts. So those graduate students came every Tuesday and sang with the choir, and it was a great opportunity to meet outside of the choir and learn about the experiences of this growing project. So the 44 choir members have grown each season to now, well, pre-pandemic, over 80 people in the choir. And you might have recalled the scene in the video where there were, it said, insiders and outsiders. In addition to singing together, the group has a reflective writing exchange. So each week, participants in the choir receive a menu of writing prompts, and whoever wishes to, if they're in one of my classes, like a community music class or a peace building class I designed, or that initial graduate seminar, they're required to do the writing. And then those exchanges are opportunities for the inside or incarcerated choir members to build a relationship with the outside members. The topics the first 3 seasons were related to books. We read Stephen King's On Writing. We read We're All Doing Time by Bo Lozoff, he and his wife Sita founded the Human Kindness Foundation. And then the third book we read is Christopher Small's Music King, which is a book that I used tremendously in my dissertation research. Also, the prompts become opportunities for me to share what's happening in their thinking with the whole choir. And then volunteers in the choir have created newsletters with snippets from the writing. And those newsletters are available on the choir website. At the end of each choir season, the entire group, whether they participated in the writing or not, received a newsletter. So there's opportunity to really learn and reflect on what people are learning about. And I learned quite a bit from the experience because many of the men in the choir, we started out with a pretty traditional reading choral scores, and many of the men weren't familiar with choral scores. And so I learned that I needed to include little musical tidbits to teach them about beat and meter and melody, etc. So the program grows and evolves just like the rest of us. I come from Iowa. Iowa is mixed up many times with Ohio and Idaho. They sound very similar, but Iowa is here, and it's just about a 3-hour drive, 3 to 4 hour drive west of Chicago. And this whole area, there are many, many Native American tribes that are indigenous to this plains part of the United States of America and Canada. And the following tribal nations still thrive in Iowa: Omaha Tribe of Nebraska in Iowa, Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, Meskwaki, and the Ho-Chunk Nations. And this building that you see here is where my office is, the University of Iowa. Not Ohio, not Idaho, Iowa. So that is where I am coming from and where I'll be going back to, God willing, tomorrow. My presentation is titled Cultivating Compassion, Practices and Processes of Music Making for Personal and Social Growth Inside and Outside Prisons. There we are. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you, University of Iowa. They are my employer, as far as it goes. What? That title had the two words compassion and prisons in the same space. We don't traditionally think of that because prisons are extremely harmful spaces in many, many different reasons. However, here is an example of the choir. Before each rehearsal, we start with a just brief meditation, simple, based on my own yoga practice. And if you want to learn more about this project, a book was just published in 2019 titled Redemption Songs by Andy Douglas, A Year in the Life of a Community Prison Choir. Andy was one of the outside volunteers who's also a nonfiction writer. And Andy wrote his experiences of one academic year in the Oakdale Choir. When we have concerts, we began way back in 2009, where the prison administration would allow 85 people to come into the facility to be in the audience. So I didn't even tell my colleagues in the School of Music or in the College of Education because most of those 85 people were family members of the inside singers. Then, when Jim McKinney became warden, the man that you saw with the silver hair at the beginning of the video, he increased that to up to 300 people that came into the facility. So you can see how the audience just fits into the gym. I may have, nope, good, there's Jim, the warden. I think throughout Europe, at least a lot of countries in Europe, the term is governor. And when my colleague Kirsten Anderson visited Iowa and she was used to the term governor, she referred to Jim as governor, and Jim was like, wow, that's awesome. Governors in the United States have quite a lot of power. They are the person in charge of the state. So he really enjoyed that term, by the way. Jim McKinney, as warden, allowed us to do a really unusual project in November of 2018. It was a musical learning exchange. The Soweto Gospel Choir visited from South Africa. And we did this project where the South African choir sang and we learned songs from them. The Oakdale choir sang and we learned songs from them. And in the process of preparing for this project, I discovered a song that was titled, How Shall We Come Together? We Shall Come Together Singing. I'm like, yes. It's from a website called Songs for the Great Turning, where they have a lot of free songs available. And I thought, yes, this song will be absolutely perfect. It's by a woman named Maggie Wheeler that you saw in the video. She was wearing this kind of a tan sweater, dark black hair. She's a TV actress in a show you may recognize titled Friends. In the show Friends, she played the character Janice, the character that would go, oh my God! That's Janice, that's Maggie Wheeler. She's actually a singer-songwriter. And when I contacted her to get permission, I contacted her to get permission to use the song, How Shall We Come Together? She said, Mary, you want to use my song in a prison with the Soweto Gospel Choir? I'm traveling to Iowa. And she did. She was in town for like a good 5 days, and we had lots of events. And her friend, Sarah Thompson, who is the woman with the silver hair right here, she's a singer-songwriter based in Duluth, Minnesota, just north of Iowa. And they both shared songs with the event. And I facilitated guided discussions. And it was a really interesting opportunity for everyone gathered to reflect upon the theme, Changes We Choose, which was a theme that the participants inside Think Tank, a group of insiders and a group of outsiders, both separately reflected on the topic. The other thing I had mentioned that Jim did with the Oakdale Choir was increase the audience size to over 300 people. He started a dog training program where the men in the prison trained dogs. Many of the men have said that experience of working with a dog taught them more than almost any other program they had ever done. He also supported the University of Iowa Liberal Arts Beyond Bars, a college credit bearing program. So again, these things were all pre-pandemic, and it feels quite odd to be standing and talking about a project that lasted 10 years And now, from March 3rd of 2020, nothing. The men in the prison in Iowa have not had any programming except there are 8 prisons in the state, and one prison has a college class where 3 college faculty members from Grinnell College are going in and teaching at the Newton facility. So as outside volunteers, we've started a pen pal project where we've been writing letters via an electronic system to connect with the men in the prison, as well as students in a class that I designed that I'll be talking about a little bit more. Nevertheless, heartfelt acceptance of where we are. We are in 21 in a pandemic. Another project that occurred, this is something that Joelle might be interested in. I was going to mention it, but it's up here. I'm happy you're here. There's an organization in New York City titled Heartbeat Opera, and they do radical revisions of traditional operas. And one that they did pre-pandemic, and then they did another project in 2020 related to it, was Beethoven's Fidelio. To connect this opera that takes place in a prison with contemporary audiences, what they did was they collected audio footage of these 6 different choirs. And they took the tune, the O Welche Lust, the prisoner's chorus from the opera, and split it into 6 different sections. And every section of the choir recorded one of those, and then they stitched the audio together to one piece. And Dan and Ethan from Heartbeat Opera traveled to 4 of those 6 prisons and collected video footage. So in the stage production in New York, during the prisoner's chorus, they showed a video which included images of the men in the prison, in the actual prisons in the United States as that was produced. When the PR, when the public relations, the media took the story and shared it, there was some misunderstandings, and they thought that the people incarcerated in Iowa were going to travel to New York for an opera. Woo! Not everybody thought that, but it was a little bit of a mistake. They didn't, their voices traveled and their images traveled, but it was just this project. So some questions to ponder as we're exploring this presentation. Many of us are here researching and questioning this idea of music making inside prisons. So a question for us to consider is, what would satisfy us as outcomes of music making in prison? What would be satisfying for us in the short term and the longer term? What would be satisfying when reflecting on this? Maybe we've experienced a taste of some of this already, depending on what you think would be satisfying. Miriam Kaba, who is a U.S. abolitionist, prison abolitionist, which we'll talk about in a second, she argues any effort to abolish prisons and the prison industrial complex are anti-capitalist and international. What do you think this means? How can we collaborate to create desired outcomes moving forward? So prison industrial complex, this term, the definition I'm going to share is from this organization titled Critical Resistance. I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with the organization, to look at it. You know, there was a slide that maybe didn't get through. I've got one slide that shows comparative, but it might be coming up. Anyway, this term was coined in the United States, and it is a global issue. So these women, Angela Y. Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Rose Bratz, are 3 people that were part of the thinkers behind critical resistance. And how they define it is the term prison industrial complex describes the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. So it's big, really big. In the United States, the prison industrial complex, and prisons are a legacy of slavery. In fact, the 13th Amendment in the United States states neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime where the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place, which basically means people who are in prison, it's legal for them to be employed on pennies for a dollar, not earning much money, slave labor. This is all, the prison industrial complex involves this factor, as well as in the United States and other countries, there are private prisons. It's 8% of all the prisons in the United States. In addition to that, there are a lot of different companies earning money from incarceration. For example, all of the security companies that coordinate electronic communication, the email systems, telephone systems, the things related to security, the cameras, all of the equipment, the food in the prisons. There is many, many, many aspects of companies earning money from incarceration. It's an issue. And in the United States, mass incarceration impacts many people. So these ideas relate to the United States and can be paralleled to other countries. So the people who are incarcerated in the United States is extreme. But there are also formerly incarcerated people in the United States, that's 4.9. People ever convicted of a felony, people with a criminal record, and people with immediate family members who have ever been to prison or jail, 113 million adults. It impacts everyone. Even if we're not quite directly aware, it's part of our social fabric that is not really solving some of the root challenges of being human. That's one broad way to think about it. And in the United States, it's a very local issue. This author, John Pfaff, argues that we have 3,144 distinct criminal justice systems, one for every county in the United States. So a lot of different local issues. I am feeling like I missed a slide. I'm going to do a little revision. It's always good to review, right? Reflect back. I think there was one slide that has, oh, maybe it's coming up later. I guess I've been editing this every day, so what I think I know, it's not exactly, it's coming up a little later. So I've mentioned this. What is abolition? What is abolitionist thinking? First of all, whenever I see a word that's negatively charged, like, for example, recidivism reduction, what does that actually mean? That really means welcoming returning citizens, providing education, providing employment and housing. So when we abolish prisons, well, what is it that we're trying to create? It's kind of it can be confusing. Words like anti-bullying, what do we really mean? Creating positive relationships. So it's just something to consider. Well, according to Mariame Kaba, in an interview that she did with Elias Rodriguez in The Nation, abolition is a collective vision of a restructured society where we all have what we need. So that involves things like de-escalation. It could be a personal de-escalation when we're in some kind of a conflictual situation and learning how to de-escalate from that stress, or a larger de-escalation among like a crowd having a stressful conflict, resolving or transforming conflicts, mediation, mutual aid, knowing what our neighbor needs, knowing what our peer humans need, and supporting that. And our other than human, our larger earth justice environment. What is it that we need to do that is caring for the earth? And Mariame Kaba, it follows this model of transformative justice, looking at the institutional challenges like structural racism and other things that need deeper transformative change. One thing she says that I think is pretty brilliant is that we don't know exactly what the steps are to make these changes, but we, first of all, have the capacity. Earlier today, Kirsten was talking about, I'm borrowing this from today. She said, as a human species, we figured out how to create something to fly to the moon. We have to fly internationally. We have a lot of these skills. We just need to choose to figure out how to do it. And Mariam Kaba would say, well, we don't know how we're going to do it, but we can figure it out as we get there. Here's the video. Here's the sheet I wanted to make sure I shared. So you see these are the countries of the folks that were planning to arrive in Porto for our week, and many of them had to cancel for various reasons. You can notice the comparison of incarceration rates. This is the number of people per 100,000 in the population. There are 4 countries, Norway, Germany, Ireland, Belgium, that are under 100. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are between 100 and 193 population per 100,000, and as an outlier, the United States at 629. This is from World Prison Brief. You can find lots of this information online, and you can see why it's there's a big problem in the United States. A song! Remember, did you raise your hand a moment ago and say, oh, singing is a learned skill? Yes, so I invite you to stand up. Let's take a little bit of a musical break. I wrote this song. Oh, what is she talking about? She really wants me to stand up? It's gonna feel good. And if you really want to sit down, stay seated, no problem. This is a song that I wrote based on Gandhi's Be the Change You Want to See in the World. And it's a song that the Oakdale Choir has done a couple times. So we'll just start with a simple little, ooh, ooh. This is the introduction. Ooh. You can sing a 5th higher. Ooh, ooh. Okay. Change that we want to see in the world. Oh, who do we want to? Maybe you just want to touch the beat. We want to. You can do this kind of quietly though. Want to see, to see. To be the change that we want to see in the world. Oh, beautiful job, everyone. Give yourself a way to go, team. Clap for yourselves. Beautiful, beautiful singing. So, question, what kind of changes do we need to make in prison systems? In music-making practices, both inside and outside prisons. Here's an image from 2016, the start of an international network with Sarah Lee from the UK, me, Jenny Henley from the UK, Kirsten and Anish, at a conference in Scotland. What kind of changes do we need to make? This person, their name is Prentice Hemphill, a teacher, embodiment coach, writer, and conflict facilitator. According to Prentice, they say, the kind of change we are after is cellular, as well as institutional, is personal and intimate, is collective, as well as cultural. We are making love synonymous with justice. Prentice Hemphill has a really interesting podcast interview. Their podcast is called Finding Our Way, and in season 2, episode 12, Harm, Punishment, and Abolition with Mariam Kaba. Mariam Kaba is the person I've mentioned a couple times, and she wrote We do this till we free us, abolitionist organizing and transforming justice. In that interview, what Mariam Kaba says, are people good or bad, is the wrong question. Have you ever heard someone talk about people in prison are the bad people? We're not in prison, we're the good people. That is the wrong question. Rather, our actions have outcomes. Our actions could be along a continuum of nourishing to depleting, from showing care to showing harm. And these actions are not only actions that we create when we interact with others, these are actions for ourselves. To what extent are we internally nourishing ourselves or depleting ourselves, care or harm? And it's not a simple one thing or the other. Everything is always much more complex. Dr. Reuben Jonathan Miller from the University of Chicago published a book titled Halfway Home, Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration. The University of Iowa, every October, has a One Community, One Book project through the Center for Human Rights, and this was our book in October, and Dr. Miller spoke. One of the things he spoke about was he used to really work hard to try to change policy so that things would be more efficient for society in different ways, obviously related to incarceration challenges. Then he realized, this is an international factor, the policies will change depending on who's in power. So a lot of work toward one direction of change in the next cycle of political leadership can go the other way. So he would argue what's more important, the change he would argue for, is changing hearts and minds. And in my experience with music making in prisons, it is a conduit for that type of change. A peacemaking criminologist who's based in Indiana named Hal Popinski has argued the opposite of violence is responsiveness. And I would argue that sense of responsiveness is a process. Here's an image from a dog from the Oakdale Choir. You saw a couple of those if you were looking at that video. The dog I mentioned about the dog training program. That is a pretty powerful experience of being responsive, is when you're interacting with a pet. And one of our Oakdale Choir members was reflecting on the fact these dogs are in prison, but they've never committed a crime or gone to trial, but they're in prison. So he wrote a song titled Puppy Prison Blues. I hope you can read it and understand it. It's about a 3-minute song, and Shane has created a lot of symbolism with this. Let's see if we can, whoopsie.
Shipped me to this prison when I was much too young. But I ain't never done nothing to land me in this pen. I'm stuck in Oakdale prison. My tail is dragging low. When I hear those keys a-clanging, I hang my head and moan. Now when I was just a puppy, my mama told me, son, always be a good dog, don't ever bite no one. But I bit a man on his little toe just to watch him cry. Now I walk up and down these hallways, and all I can chase are flies. Well, I bet there's rich dogs living somewhere outside these bars. I bet they're eating T-bones and riding in nice cars, but I know I had it coming. I guess I can't be free, but I can hear those coyotes howling, and that's what tortures me. Well, if they freed me from this prison, if the choice to leave was mine, you know I'd move it on a whole lot further down the line, far from Oakdale prison. That's where I'd want to stay. I'd sit down with them coyotes and howl my blues away. Now folks, don't take this serious. This song is just for fun. We love our pups at Oakdale, we wouldn't hurt a one. We pet them and we treat them, and we hope they always stay. Hey, they don't judge or look down on us, and they melt our blues away. Now there's a man deserves some credit for the programs here today, from the puppies to the music and many other things. So thanks to Jim McKinney for everything you do. We appreciate the efforts of you and your whole crew. Yeah, we appreciate the efforts of your whole doggone crew.
Responsiveness, a sense of responsiveness with dogs, with a warden that's open to creating this kind of space, and that reciprocal relationship that happens between both person coordinating the dog training. And the line about the dog who is howling, like the coyotes that are howling and having the T-bone steaks and everything is such a really interesting contrast that Shane adds to that song. So what aspects of music making are responsive, and what aspects of music making are not responsive? And part of this, as a music educator, do we have music education students in the group? Music performance majors, people performance? Okay, so I'm not sure what else. What are your other areas of study over here? Music studies? Yeah. Okay, so what aspects of music making are responsive? You've probably had some experiences being a student in private studios or perhaps in a larger ensemble. To what extent do you feel like that experience is an engaging, responsive experience? And to what extent have you felt disconnected, and why? And why? So some examples in my own teaching, a brief story. I have had experiences of making mistakes. Anybody else? Woohoo! Are we human? Way to go, humanity! And so, for example, when the choir began, we had a reflective writing. I told you all about reflective writing exchange, and the men in the choir anybody in the choir could leave a note for me. And I would receive many lyrics that the men wanted set to music, which I love doing. And in the 4th season of the choir, one of the choir members said, it was the 3rd season, he said, "Whatever happened to that song I gave you titled My Love Always? I really wanted to, get that set to music." I'm like, oh, yeah. I pulled out the sheet, and he wrote at the bottom of the lyrics, "In the style of Reba McEntire." Okay, I hadn't listened to Reba McEntire very much, so I went to YouTube and listened to what I thought was the musical style, kind of an upbeat country song, and I wrote it out, brought the song to the choir rehearsal. We began rehearsing it. In less than 2 weeks, I received a note saying that the man who wrote this song did not like the setting I had picked. He had an image of a slow ballad, prayerful, loving to his family, because the song was a love song to his family, My Love Always. And I pulled the song away from choir rehearsals. Over the summer, we sat at the piano and worked on what that song could be and created a song that he felt fit. So I was not being responsive. This was prior to starting a songwriting workshop, which began summer of 2010, where we did engage carefully with people as they came up with ideas. In that summer of 2009, one of the men set lyrics to an idea of when he was in the courtroom, sentenced to prison, the look his mother gave him when he was told he was going to have his sentence. He wrote out these lyrics. I took them home. He gave me permission to take the lyrics and set them in a way that made sense. They were so sad. I could only write one line of a song at a time. I don't even really enjoy watching US football because it looks so painful on the screen. So I've got a lot of empathy, and it was like, ah! So I set it to music, and we'll listen to just a little bit of it, then I'll tell you the rest of the story. first time the choir rehearsed the song and sang it all the way through, it was quiet in that rehearsal room. One of the men said that was the most beautiful thing I'd heard since I'd been in prison. We did the song. It was hard to sing and learn, but it felt meaningful to the group. We sang it simple unison, and I know as a choir director, it can be helpful to repeat a piece of literature that is meaningful. So I took the song and arranged it in 4-part harmony to use a few seasons later. We started rehearsing, and then I received an anonymous note from one of the men in the choir that said they were tired of singing this particular song, and it had turned the composer into a monster, meaning that his ego was very inflated because a lot of people complimented him on this. And so coming back to this issue of responsiveness, to what extent can we be responsive to the needs of particular individuals? And then when we have this larger choir context with people and all of their different needs, it can be extremely difficult to figure out the most effective way to be responsive to everyone's needs. It's like, I have a colleague in Italy who would call it being an active anthropologist, always having your pulse on the energy of what's happening among the people in the group that you're collaborating with. So many times when we're talking about music making in prisons, we're talking about the people who are incarcerated, and many times we don't think about the survivors of crime. And that's an important population to keep in mind, that we're not causing any additional harm to survivors of crime. A woman named Elma gave permission to take a poem she wrote titled Inside a Mother's Heart, and we set it to music. She came into the prison and listened to her song performed by a group of summer songwriter incarcerated members, and she said the experience of hearing her lyrics sung by men in the prison helped her realize she is more than a victim, and we are more than the worst thing we've ever done. She shared with me this experience was one of a series of other things that helped her reflect on that. She also wrote additional poetry, so I found more poetry by her and got permission to add more to her song. So we'll listen to just a little bit of her song, Inside a Mother's Heart. How y'all doing? Great. Got a couple thumbs up. It looks like most people are still awake, which is really good because it's a dark view. Inside a mother's heart, search deep and you will find the treasures of tomorrow and the tears she leaves behind. Inside a mother's heart, search deep and you will find the treasures of tomorrow and the tears she leaves behind. Coming back to this theme of responsiveness, Elma's words in this last section, trade tears for understanding, let patience bring you growth. One reflection of those ideas is that idea of being responsive to our own inner needs. We saw Michael Blackwell. In fact, earlier this week, we interacted with Michael on Core Links. He's incarcerated in the Anamosa prison. And he had written the theme to the very last concert we did in person, Remember, Be Love, with the message, every wrong is the reason to forgive. Many of these songs are available on the choir website using the Creative Commons license. By the way, the song we sang a moment ago, The Change, our mutual colleague, Dirk and I's colleague, Dave Camlin, took that song and added quite a bit to it using a Game of Thrones mashup and a little ending with a rap about Gandhi. So that's also on the choir website. I have plenty of other songs to share. So Michael talked quite a bit about the experience of creating music for his lyrics, turning his dream into a reality, appreciating and supporting each other through the process, and building a sense of shared humanities. I have an undergraduate student who's a colleague working together on a book chapter for the Oxford Handbook of Care and Music Education. And these ideas come from the work Becca and I are doing, and I mentioned I'm teaching a class called Peace Building, Singing and Writing in a Prison Choir. All of the students in the class, I've taught it both in the prison with incarcerated students and outside students, and also outside. And the students are required to do 2 projects, an inner peace building project and a communal peace building project. So the inner peace building is based on Olivier Urbain, who is a gentleman based in Japan. The Minon Music Institute is an institute for music and peace building. And then self-compassion. Kristen Neff has written a lot about that. So the basic point we're trying to make is that change is multidimensional. There's an inside-out change of a sense of becoming a deeply more, practicing a sense of this inner peace, building inner resilience against potentially damaging forces, and also Hemphill's idea of change being at a cellular level, as well as top-down change, where you have leaders such as someone like Jim McKinney, bottom-up change, non-policy makers, thinking about how we can create more abolitionist thinking, ways of mutual aid, looking at the core needs of our own peers. Communal peace building, based on a book John Paul Lederach wrote called The Art and Soul of Peace Building. And in this idea, chapter 8, he talks about the web of relationships. So in the class, the students all semester have an inner peace building project. This fall, something as simple as changing diet to more fruits and vegetables, and the students reflect and realize, they have more energy when they eat plant-based foods. To the communal peace building project where they pick someone in their relationship. It could be someone who's died. It could be someone in their own someone in their own network that they want to build a relationship with. They don't tell that person they're going to be working on the relationship, but they would create something like letter writing or maybe writing a song or something like that. There are, in the United States, a couple similar projects, a program called One Small Step, StoryCorps effort to connect people across the U.S. who disagree with one another to remind them of their shared humanity. Does anybody have this? COVID is really magnifying some of these differences across the globe. It was piloted in 40 cities in 2018, expanding to 4 politically dividing cities, including where my mother lives in Wichita, Kansas. And when I visited her before Thanksgiving, the front page of the Sunday paper talked about this project, One Small Step. Braver Angels is another program that facilitates dialogue for people with opposing political beliefs. So change, what change can we make? What can happen in our own inner self and in our communal self? In the Navajo concept of law, this term is a lot different than many other Western societies. They define law as something fundamental, absolute, existed from the beginning of time, a source of healthy, meaningful life, solidarity, reconciliation with community, family, nature, restoring good relations with others and with oneself. A horizontal system of justice, concept of a circle, rather than an adversarial vertical system where there are power dynamics that can impact people negatively, like in the state of Iowa, when someone wants to get a sentence commuted, even if a parole board votes that they should have their sentence commuted, the governor can say no, one person. The horizontal system of justice in this Navajo concept of law involves unity, oneness, no beginning or end, and this concept of Ubuntu in South Africa, in this language, Metakwe Oyasin, the Lakota language. Everything's related. Now, a brief little bit. Grasa mentioned a book that I'm working on. It is getting closer to being finished, but the title changed from the bio that I shared with Grasa. The title of the book is Music Making in U.S. Prisons, Listening to Incarcerated Voices, with my co-author, Stuart Duncan. This cover art, we hope, Wilfrid Laurier University Press will agree to use. It is from a jazz workshop that occurred in the state of California, where Jack Bowers was running a prison arts program. And the gentleman who did the art is Jason Chengrian, and that's his Instagram. He's got a lot of other artwork, so you might take a picture of that if you're into visual art. This is an image that he drew, looking at, it's a vision of, his vision of one of the jazz workshops that he was involved in at Soledad Prison. The basic argument for the book is music making in prisons has the potential to build personal and social growth, as well as social awareness. The social awareness is probably the most important part of this, because without the awareness of the problems of the prison system by people like us who are not incarcerated, it's going to be very difficult to make the changes that need to occur. Social awareness, the harms of the prison industrial complex, and even what it is, our sense of common humanity, inspiration for transformative change, and the role of music educators, not only music educators who go into prisons, but musicians outside of prisons, and what we're doing in our own classroom and community contexts. The theoretical framework is based on a theory that I created in my dissertation, the theory of, whoopsie-daisy, not the theory of whoopsie-daisy. Does anybody know that one? Everybody, that's part of the humanity theory. The theory of interactional choral singing pedagogy, which basically says, if facilitated effectively, choral singing in prison context has the potential for measurable personal and social growth. And it's based on Christopher Small, his concept of musicking, where he defines music as a verb and says the most important aspects of music making are not only the sonic relationships, like when we're singing together, we're listening, the social components, and how the social components can make a difference in the experience. More research is needed to confirm, refute, and revise, and there has been a lot of research about this as well. So the table of contents, the introductory chapter is an introduction to U.S. incarceration, the prison industrial complex, and building relationships. Chapter 1, why music making in prisons? All the different elements of music making as a means to build family dynamics in a positive way, as a means to find a sense of shared humanity. I brought a couple sets of quotes from people that have been in the choir. If you're curious, I'm happy to share some specific examples. Chapter 2, Might is Not Always Right, Historical Reflections of Music Making in Prisons. And I've got a couple images to show you about that. Chapter 3, I encourage everyone to step outside of their comfort zone. That's a quote by a gentleman named Charlie Musgrave that you'll meet in a moment. Developing agency through instrumental music education in prisons. Chapter 4, Their Singing Saved Me, Social Awareness Through Choral Singing. Chapter 5, Dynamic Nature of Songwriting in Prisons, Interactions Among Singers, Prison Staff, and Audience Members. And Chapter 6, So Much More, Pedagogies that Support Human Dignity and Social Responsibility for Musical Communities Working Toward Abolition of the prison industrial complex. So briefly, way back, 1907 to 1917, this man, James Saunders, by the way, we're not having any images in the book, so you get to enjoy a few images here. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. These images are from a collection by Mike Brubaker, who has a very interesting historical blog. These are from postcards he received. So this gentleman was a music educator, James Saunders, and in 1907 to 17, he was the warden at Fort Madison, Iowa. And here is an image of a band that he started. So he changed. Things were pretty bleak in this prison, and he changed and had the people in the prison wear different, instead of the prison stripes, they wore actual clothes. They had singing over the noon hour at the meals. So there's a lot more to it, but for now, just a brief little introduction. The gentleman I mentioned, Charles Musgrave, he was a music educator at the Indiana State Penitentiary from 74 to 95. Here are some images of Charlie back then. This gentleman, Jamie Abersol, was really well known to the Abersol Jazz Play-Along records. That's the same man. And in those years, according to Charlie, there were only 2 men that entire time that ever came back into the prison. In 95, when he left the job, the prison said they were not going to replace him because of money. Here are some more images of a vocal group downtown, the band Mixed Company, and the instrumental workshop with Jamie Abersol. Here is Charles Musgrave now. He just turned 89 years old, November 17. There he is. Here is an image of Jack Bowers. Jack is wearing the red vest. He worked in the Soledad prison in California from 1980 to 2007 in Arts and Corrections with the William James Association, and did a lot of allowing, as far as that sense of responsiveness, he allowed those musicians in his group to just be leaders. He had the musicians be their own leaders and coordinate a lot, so he's done quite a bit. A very brief story about a program in Texas at a youth facility. A gentleman named David, this is a pseudonym, knew how to play guitar before he got to this prison, and there was a guitar program, so he actually knew quite a bit more than what the musicians that were teaching the program, and so were teaching. So he was not doing very well with those interactions with the teacher. Then he had some one-on-one where the teacher noticed some of these issues, and he started to transform and make some positive changes with his own music making. But he wasn't doing the work that the juvenile facility needed him to do in order to progress, because if he wasn't going to progress, he was going to get moved to a different facility in the state. So when his teacher left him at the end of the spring season, this teacher didn't know if he was going to see David in the fall or not, because he didn't know if David was going to kind of start to do all of the programming. Well, he arrives back in the fall, and David did do all the programming and created this entire guitar out of paper, Scotch tape, and the only little materials that he had within the prison. So, concluding here, very soon, federal judge James Edward, back in 1972, Doyle is his name, Judge Doyle, said, "I am persuaded that the institution of prison probably must end. In many respects, it is as intolerable within the United States as was the institution of slavery, equally brutalizing to all involved, equally toxic to the social system, equally subversive of the brotherhood of man, even more costly by some standards, and probably less rational." And in that time period, that was when in the United States incarceration was beginning to rise. People were writing about the need to abolish prisons, but what happened was no. Prisons became bigger, and in the whole globe, the incarceration rates by country, there are more than 10.35 million people incarcerated in the world. And on a little different note, the UN says the number of displaced people worldwide now tops 84 million. So to what extent are we being responsive to these people? Music making has the potential to change hearts and minds through connectivity and proximity, through self-expression and songwriting, building self-discipline and self-efficacy, ensembles, people's relationship within the group, relationship within social connections, family connections. There are so many stories about family. Musical components, the rhythm, the melody, the form, expressive qualities, and communication. Here's a board-certified music therapist that stepped into the Oakdale prison to go to a concert, and she said, after attending an Oakdale choir concert inside the prison gym, Gloria Hartley reflected on her experience. "I once heard someone describe stigma as distance. And I think where stigma exists, The space that exists in that distance is easily filled with fear, assumptions, stereotypes, caricatures, and judgments. The Oakdale Community Choir concert closed that distance, both literally, this is the first time I've ever been inside of a prison, and figuratively, to create instead a space where connection happens. The theme of the whole project is community of caring. In fact, the man that wrote the song I shared the story about My Love Always, the fall of 2015, he wrote a reflection in his reflective writing describing his experiences in the choir was that he felt like it was a community of caring, which is what we need more of. Now, we come back to this concept of change. Professor Stephen Hartnett suggests in one of the sections of Challenging the Prison Industrial Complex, we need a fundamental change in consciousness. And the two authors of Prison by Any Other Name, Maya Schwen-Noir and Victoria Law, say the cycles of inequality that exist globally continue because we have not yet done the necessary personal transformative work to create substantial change. Not yet, but I think it's happening. I think COVID is giving us a lot of inspiration to make these personal changes. And so this question of who do we want to become? And a simple deep seed for change is inner peace and self-compassion. And I have one final song that's a little bit more of an upbeat song called Go With the Flow that we can end with, and questions. You're still here. Thank you for not walking out. And maybe you want to stand up if you feel like it. I don't know. Let's see what you feel like. Here, we heard a little bit of this last week. Whoopsie, I just lost this whole slideshow. Woo! The song is the message of going with the flow, which I think is a big part of being able to build inner peace and self-compassion. Stand up. Stand still and know to go with the flow. This song is very simple. Even though the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. Stand still. Stand still and know to go with the flow. Go with the flow. Even though the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. Stand still and know. Maybe you want to move a little bit. Go with the flow. Even when the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. Stand still and know. Go with the flow. Even though the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. Stand still and know. Go with the flow. Even when the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. Stand still and know. Go with the flow. Even when the flow becomes a flood, we know that it will all come back to love. B-A-T-S-O-N. Look her up on whatever your favorite places are to look up music. And thank you very much for your energy, for singing, for dancing, and reflecting on responsiveness and change. Yes. Thank you for your question. She's asking, are the men in the prison, are all of them eligible to participate, or does it depend on certain things? And in this particular facility, the men who are not confined to their unit, so if they have not gotten into any kind of trouble, they're able to participate, and it's open to anybody who wishes to join. Yes, Kirsten?
So you mentioned that for the last, since COVID, you've been writing to the men in prison. And I just wonder if they've written to you about not having the opportunities to sing and not having that community of the choir, and how they've managed to get through lockdown, well, double lockdown in a prison during this really challenging time.
It's a really good question. Kirsten was asking that since lockdown, if anybody has written expressing how they're handling the lockdown, are they able to do things? And I know that in the Iowa prisons, they didn't even have in-person visits until like July of this year. So they only had video visits. Some of the men were able to, if their family member had a camera and they could take the video visit like on the road, meaning like the person in prison could see their community. They could drive and their family member could have their camera and just show different areas. But there weren't very many programming. I think they were even limited as far as library materials. COVID has been extremely problematic globally for everyone, especially people who are in prison. I did receive a letter November the 2nd from one of the men in the choir, another gentleman in the choir. I wrote them some messages, any ideas of things I should share with people at this conference, and this particular choir member shared that he shared that this member, before choir, this particular member that wrote me this letter was in trouble all of the time. He was first, he was very involved in gangs in the prison and just had a pretty negative attitude to everybody. But he was involved in choir and a rhetoric class at the University of Iowa, and that he started to see the world in a different lens. Songs were sung. The songs we sang, peace building, repaired family relationships for him, which were previously problematic, and that according to Richard, the gentleman that we were interacting with, that this person is still doing well. And he wrote this letter. I just received it at my university last fall. I wish to begin by expressing my appreciation for the program I was fortunate enough to be a part of, the Oakdale Choir. Although I am no longer at the formal name for the Oakdale Prison is Iowa Medical and Classification Center. He's still not formally there. I would love to continue to be part of the program. My experience was one of joy, acceptance, and growth. It was unlike anything I have ever seen in my 14 years of incarceration. It gave me a sense of normalcy and genuine unity. I had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know some of the best people I have ever met. Not only were the people inspiring, I found the music to be very moving, especially through the collaborative efforts in the Songwriting Workshop. What I do like about where I am is that we can purchase just about any musical instrument. So in this particular prison, he's able to get musical instruments. Because of that, I am saving up so I can purchase the necessary instruments to continue learning to play the piano and guitar. I am extremely grateful to Dr. Cohen and all who give of their time to make this world a better place. Thank you for everything. Please be safe. So this person was able to do instruments, or saving up money to buy a musical instrument. Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wondered if you mind sharing a bit about the very beginning of the Oakdale Community Choir, and how it went from being an idea to sort of setting it up, and what happened in the very first session
I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Before it got going, how was it?
Yeah, the very first session. So before moving to Iowa in Kansas, I was involved in a project called the East Hill Singers, which is at a minimum security unit in Kansas, where the men leave the prison and do a public concert with a group of outside volunteers. And so the idea of inside-outside choir was birthed through that. I got the idea from Elvira Voth, a woman at age 70 who began this choir in Kansas in 1995. So moving to Iowa, I was working to try to figure out how to combine my teaching, research, service into this project. But I was new to the state, didn't know people, so I met people and found someone who was volunteering in the prison for 10 years in the Catholic component of the prison. So Dorothy helped me figure out all of the personalities at the time who were the prison warden, deputy warden, the people that were the leaders. And through that connection, through probably the biggest connection is the warden at the time, his wife, his wife Paula, his name is Lowell Brandt. His wife Paula was my colleague in the College of Education. And Paula and Lowell, the warden and his wife, were involved in choirs. So I think Paula had a lot to say to her husband, encouraging him to say yes to this project. I also connected with a music therapist who was going into the prison and went just beside him into the prison with one of his sessions so I could just introduce myself to the project, to the prison, basically. So through those little layers of connections, then I had a research assistant, thank you, University of Iowa, who wrote letters to all the different community choirs in the area inviting people to join the project. So the 22 outside singers were I had about 8 or so graduate students, and the rest were volunteers in the community, some of whom have been involved every single season since 2009. So then a lot of reading, there was an article called Common Sense and Common Ground by William Cleveland, which talks about the best ways to build mutually respectful relationships between people coming into an institution and the people working in the institution. So the work that I'm doing and the discussion about abolition wasn't really part of my forefront of my thinking when I started this project. I was just trying to kind of model the project after what I learned in Kansas, and then learning more, interacting more with people in prison, realizing the problems. And one of the best things I would recommend anybody to do is to look at the Visualizing Abolition webinar and watch Angela Davis's interview. You'll be going, oh, I get it now. You can listen to her speak. So all of these efforts to basically get the project started, and it was a pilot season to see how things were, and then connecting back in with the warden. The other story here is the gentleman that I mentioned, Lowell Brandt, died unexpectedly in December of 2008. So when the interim warden began, the project was scheduled to start, so they just supported the project starting. And we began with the new warden, Dan Craig, and everything. The only major no that I got was, instead of the choir meeting over the summer months, the end of 2009, the end of the summer of 2009 in August, Dan Craig said, it's too complicated to have all these volunteers. We had 20 or so coming in every week. And so you cannot have a choir in the summer months. So starting in 2010, we began the Songwriting Workshop. And that was just a smaller group of between 2 and 10 outside songwriters coming in to collaboratively work with the men in the prison. And as Grasa said in the introduction, we've created 150 original songs, and the choir has sung 75 of those. So when we do concerts in the prison and people come in from the community, it's an introduction to the prison, and many people, you wouldn't believe how many people, I co-taught a topics in human rights class for 3 semesters. 2 weeks of the semester was an introduction to prisons and music making in prisons. And the students would come in to watch a rehearsal or go to a concert, and they wrote, I didn't realize prisoners were people. That's how bad it is in some social awareness. So we're talking about broadening social awareness. So there's any follow-up question on all of that?
thinking of all of these ideas and putting things into practice. But I think there's something about like the first session of no one knows what to expect. And, I wonder whether awkward moments.
Yes.
Right.
Well, what was really funny, I'm all about the people part of anything I'm doing. You know, I was at the door welcoming a lot of you as you came in tonight. I love connecting with people. I love introducing people to each other. The end of the first rehearsal, we walk out of the prison, and the activities specialist, Dave, said, you know, Mary, it would be a good idea for everybody to introduce themselves. So I was just so nervous about coordinating. And the other thing, when we had those weekly graduate seminar conversations, one of the graduate students said, if you had a visual bird's eye view of the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester, you would see these two separate clusters of people. And as the semester progressed, they gradually connected. So what we do in rehearsals is we start in mixed formation, and then halfway through the rehearsal, 2 or 3 times, people get up, change chairs. We always end in a big circle with May You Walk in Beauty, and I've facilitated other partner icebreaker type activities from my interplay training that helps to make some of those connections. Kirsten? Yeah, mixing of outside and inside singers, as well as sections like soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and then mixing into combined sections. And the intention is at the beginning of every rehearsal, we start in mixed formation, although sometimes people like to be by a certain spot person, and so they sit by the person they want to sit by. And following Dirk's idea of freedom, try to create as much freedom as possible in that space. Well, there's one person telling everybody what to do. I have a lot of collective leadership, though. Many students from the university and men in the prison will lead the group through songs. So, and many of the people that are writing reflective notes will introduce songs from those written exchanges that they've done. Good questions. Other questions, comments, reflections? Problems. There's one back here. Yes?
Do you have many insider participants that once the sentence is over, they come back as outsiders?
Yes, I didn't include that information here. Thank you for asking. Yes, the first person was Harold Searcy. In fact, Harold was in the choir the first season in 2009, and we sang a song of his. Then, well, actually, no, it was this. He just joined in the summer, but he only was in the choir a few weeks or maybe a month, but didn't sing in a concert. And then he gets moved to another prison, is released, and then gets permission to come back. So he came back as an outside volunteer and was not only involved in the choir, he was also involved in the University of Iowa Liberal Arts Beyond Bars as a mentor, a peer mentor. We've had another man named Kenneth Bailey who's come back as an audience member, and a number of people have come back as audience members, but only one has come back as an outside choir member. And one of the things we don't really do well yet, I don't know, maybe other countries do, but for sure the United States, we don't have a reintegration ritual. There's so many rituals when people go into prison and the labels that are thrust upon them. In fact, there's just one small thing you could do walking out of this space tonight is to intend to use person-centered words rather than a label of offender or felon or ex-offender or inmate or prisoner or convict. Simply use people. It's a subtle but major transformation. The words we use infuse the actions we choose. So be very person-centered. So I was telling you about the people, the reintegration ritual. So we had an idea, we're gonna have a formerly incarcerated choir member come into a concert for a performance. We will give them a purple shirt. Well, I forgot to double check with security that we could have permission to bring an extra purple shirt in, because they were concerned that one of the incarcerated choir members would get the purple shirt and escape the prison. So we weren't able to do that in the prison, but September 21st was International Peace Day, and in Iowa City downtown there was a new peace pole. So my peace building students and the outside choir members and a few formerly incarcerated choir members joined in this outside square and sang. So at that event, I gave a purple shirt to Jeff Luttrell, a formerly incarcerated choir member, as a reintegration ritual. Because there was no prison officer saying, no, you can't do that. So, thank you for that question. All right, well, I want to thank you for your attention, your energy, and invite you to just enjoy how you wish, a sense of inner peace, self-compassion as we move into this season of December and winter, and may we all learn to go with the flow. Thank you.